see if we get this rolling here. Rolling on a tire. See if it can shoot it down here. Rolling on the tire. Rolling on the tire. Rolling. Trying to steady this with one hand. Give you a feeling of what it's like here. Rolling down. Here's a pretty steep downhill, so I'm gonna have to operate with both hands on this. So check in later, buddies. And tomorrow, we'll cross the river right here at Fort Benton. There's a bridge that goes across, and we'll ride on down through Geraldine and into Lewistown. Okay? And I plan on interviewing myself throughout the trip when we get to these different places. Okay, Shep? Nice seeing you again, buddy. Solid. Okay. That's a take. We're on Highway 80 and coming out of Fort Benton. We just crossed a bridge across the Missouri River and got onto Highway 80. Now, this road is very low traffic. Much, much better than 87 that we were on yesterday, which had considerable amount of moderate traffic. This is low traffic. And we're up here high, up on the plains, some of the most fertile wheat country in the world. Grow very, very high protein wheat here. Oh, this is very low traffic. We may not hear too many cars coming by. Now I see one coming by right now. Who's going to whiz right by. And there he goes. I'm going to load up now and ride on to Geraldine. It's partly cloudy. The wind is calm. That's good. There's hardly any wind now, which is nice. And it's low traffic here on this road. Highway 80 on the way to Geraldine on the Lewis and Clark Bike Trail. Today's Monday. By Wednesday, I hope to be in Lewistown, where, with any luck, I'll be able to take a shower. Okay. Oh, that's a take. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Square Butte. Those are the moccasins further on. Pretty soon we'll be heading south directly into Lewistown. Just crossing the Judith River on the Lewis and Clark bicycle trail on the way to Lewistown. Cold, windy, overcast, May 30th, Tuesday. It's been a horrendous 20 miles behind me. Lots of intense weather. Rain, a lot of rain, hail, sleet, but no snow.
The Missouri River now is not the free-flowing, wild, unpredictable, untamed river that it used to be. It's changed. In fact, some people refer to it now as the world's largest plumbing system. The river in the upstream states, Montana and the Dakotas, has been impounded behind 6 enormous dams now. 1/3 of the river is now impounded in lakes, so it's not free-flowing anymore. Of course, the lakes trap sediment, so the river below these dams is not the big muddy anymore like it used to be. It's very clear water. It's a very different river system. So the upstream states, the river's been impounded, and downstream, the river that used to meander and change its channel at will, pick up and change beds practically every night, it's been pinned to a certain channel now that affords all kinds of economic uses of the river, including navigation. It's allowed people to farm yearly areas in the floodplain that they may or may not be able to farm in certain years depending upon the kinds of floods that they have. It's allowed houses, buildings, cities to encroach upon the floodplain that used to be too dangerous to build on because of the repeated flooding. So it's allowed all kinds of economic uses, but it has created all kinds of other problems, mostly environmental. So the two groups that have been harmed that I want to talk about are, one, the Native Americans, and two, the fish and wildlife resources in the basin. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are being done in both cases to try to improve the lot of both harmed groups. And let me start with the tribes. We, as a country, made a decision back about the time of World War II that we weren't going to put up with this river's petulant behavior anymore. It was like the bad child, you know. It would flood at will, and sometimes the streets of Omaha and Kansas City were navigable by boat, and that was just too much for people to put up with, and we had to tame this river. We were going to tame this damn river and teach it a lesson. So we also had other problems, economic problems. The upper Midwest had bad unemployment rate. We had people starting to return from World War II. So we thought we'd create a lot of jobs and we'd build dams. And dams were very good projects, public works projects for jobs. So we built these dams in the upper basin. There are 6 of them. There's, the Fort Peck in Montana. We have Garrison Dam in North Dakota, Owyhee Dam in South Dakota, Big Bend, Fort Randall, and Gavin's Point Dam. Those are the 6 dams. And so we largely tamed the river from the flooding that used to happen every year. And we built these dams. Now, the Native American communities, particularly the Sioux tribes, the 3 affiliated tribes in North Dakota, the Assiniboine and Sioux tribes in Montana, had lived along the river bottoms for generations, for thousands of years. The river bottoms provided the only fuel that they had, because that's where you found the timber, was on the river bottoms. They had very fertile lands for their gardens. They had shelter. They had wildlife to hunt in the river bottoms. It was what enabled them to lead their subsistence lifestyle quite comfortably for thousands of years. So when we made this decision as a country to tame this river system, we ignored the needs of the tribes largely. In fact, the U.S. government negotiated with some of the tribes for the taking of their lands after the dams had been built and the water was already flooding Indian lands. I mean, the water was rising up around their ankles at the time we began negotiating with the tribes for the taking of their land. And of course we paid the tribes less than we would have otherwise because the land was already flooded and wasn't worth anything. Of course we caused the flooding. It was a very callous treatment of the tribes that had been living there for years. We ended up moving a lot of the tribes to the benches where the soils were thinner. They had no timber, no protection. The farming was bad, and they were unable to sustain their lifestyle. And the tribes, even though this was done largely in the 40s, they still have not recovered economically, and they may never recover economically. It was a terrible, terrible thing. And a much higher percentage of Indian lands and white-owned lands was flooded as a result of the building of the dams. Proportionally, they really got the worst end of the deal. So that was a mistake we made in the past, not dealing with them fairly.
That's where the three affiliated tribes, my Rikara, Band, and Hidatsa, lived when we lived right by the river. The blue that you see now is what Lake Sakakawea is. This is what inundated our entire people. So now we live around the outside, but this is where we used to live. There's still, our tribes do suffer some severe cultural problems, specifically my tribe as Narikara. I don't speak my language. That was one of the things that was probably real devastating. We've had elders that after that move and the move of the relocation off, to the upland, or they say from the bottomlands, an actual, we had elders that died from depression, and they couldn't stand the move. It was just like grieving. It just killed them. They couldn't stand the move, and it just tore them apart. And that was really sad. And we had severe cases of, and it's still real rampant on the reservation, is, alcoholism, young people with suicides, seeing their parents and their families fall apart. There was a lot of people moving to cities to try to find jobs and then coming back. Right after that dam, or right before that, the dam was built, World War II was right then. People had to come back and find their home was gone from the war after they went away and came back. And there has been a lot that has the damaging effects are still to our people. We see very apparent.
The other thing that was harmed, of course, were the basin's fish and wildlife resources, which in the 1940s we didn't think about as much. That's changed in recent years, but I don't think we thought about the needs of some of the native fish that needed a slow-moving, muddy, silt-clogged river to live in. That was the kind of environment they had. I don't think we thought about the native birds that needed sandbars and islands in the river system, particularly in the lower river system, to nest, and to be able to nest on an island in the river free from predators so that it would take their eggs. And it took us a long time to see the impacts of some of these, but now, 50 years later, we have species that are going extinct. We are losing species in the river system. We have 3 species which are considered by the federal government to be threatened or endangered. That's a legal term, but it means that they are in danger of going extinct. There are 2 bird species. One is called the least tern, the other is called the piping plover. And we have a fish species called the pallid sturgeon, which is very much in danger of going extinct. And it's an ancient fish, as old as the dinosaurs, that has lived in the Missouri River for tens of thousands of years, ever since the Missouri River has flowed this direction, since the last retreat of the last ice age. And we're in grave danger of losing that fish now. But of course, it's not just those 3 species we're losing. There are other species that are going downhill. The floodplain in the lower river system, the lower 700 miles of the river, has been reduced to about 1/10 of its original width. Okay, we cut the river system off from the floodplain. It's no longer connected to the floodplain, and of course, a river needs its floodplain. It needs to flood periodically, pick up organic material from the floodplain to bring back in the river system that helps maintain the health and vitality of the river system. It needs shallow water in the springtime so that fish can spawn and their young can be reared in the shallow backwaters and not be in danger of being kind of flushed through the system as if it was a gigantic plumbing system. And now, of course, what we have is a river in the lower basin that has been confined to a very fast-moving channel. The water moves through it very quickly. If a fish is lucky enough to spawn and rear children, the young don't have a chance. They are literally flushed all the way down in the system into the Mississippi River. So we have probably 1/10 of the total number of fish per river mile in the system that we used to have before the dams were built. Okay, it's not the healthy, vital ecosystem that we had back in the old days.
There he goes.
Plankton feeder. Send the head down when y'all sowing this thing when you're done. Send the head down when you're done. Danny, huh?
Because all the dams built in Montana and in North and South Dakota were built exclusively to store water for barge traffic for a very small contingent of our society down below. And hydropower was sort of extraneous and everything else. So we've destroyed a massive riparian environment that should never have happened. And it wouldn't happen today. Those dams would not be built today. That's a fact. Because we have many, many alternative power generations, wind particularly. But the Yellowstone is the only river that they didn't destroy. And that's not going to be destroyed with dams. That's a given. And when you put in dams, you eliminated a massive environmental cycles, natural cycles that had destructive effects on plant communities and a lot of fish. For example, once you stop migratory patterns of fish, and then sturgeon, for example, and paddlefish are an endangered species, whether you label them that or not. I mean, they're terminal. And the paddlefish, you go back millions of years. Flies, crocodile, and cockroaches and paddlefish haven't changed in maybe 50 million years because they found a lifestyle that worked. Had no reason to change. And we have essentially destroyed them with dams to provide water to run some coal and grain traffic that we can ship by rail much cheaper. It's a massive federal welfare program that should never have happened.
I don't touch. I'm the cook over here, and I don't like touching it.
Well, I don't.
Well, I'll wash it for you, but I won't. You know, I just don't want to get that fish on.
What's she weigh? 92, according to this. Good.
And I think 92, that gets you in the Whopper Club, no doubt.
Yeah, that's what I... First one.
First one,
Yeah, I was here last year, I never hooked one, and I worked all day yesterday with the kitchen either side of me.
Man, he looks proud, doesn't he?
Boy,
Can you tell us
You ought to throw the back.
where? Can you tell us where you're from, sir?
Twin Valley, Minnesota. I'm a North Dakotan. I was born and raised Slope County, but I live in Minnesota.
Got a million acres of the Charlie Russell National Wildlife Refuge, just north of Lewistown, on the river, 100 miles long, and then we have a stretch of the river 150 miles long upstream from there. That's administered by the federal government, Department of Interior. And on either side we have over 1.5 million on the south and 1.5 million on the north of public land. So we have somewhere close to 5 million acres of federal land, all Department of Interior, that we don't have to buy or anything. It's a massive gift to America's society. But if you go from Fort Benton, Montana, down to Fort Peck Reservoir, to the dam, reservoirs are made by men, lakes are made by God, pretty and simple, so it's not a lake, but you go that stretch, that's 250 miles long. And we have looked at this long before this Lewis and Clark expedition exercise started, you might say, but we call it the Lewis and Clark Discovery Wilderness. And we've mapped this out, we've got it pretty well scoped years ago, and the essence of it is that that would become a wilderness entity. And going back to St. Louis to Fort Clatsop, Washington, there's a whole series of locations that should become like a string of pearls of wilderness elements, or state parks of wilderness element. Like you go down below Garrison Dam, north of Bismarck, from the tail race of Garrison Dam to the tail of Oahe Reservoir at Mandan. That's 52 miles long. I've worked that area personally a lot. It's the only remnant of native massive cottonwoods. The largest cottonwood known in North America is in there. And it's a native riparian that has not been destroyed by virtue of dam construction. Although there was a dam proposed above Bismarck and Mandan to destroy that, but that isn't going to happen. So there is 52 miles of massively important riparian that is available for another element of the wilderness system. So what I would see is a national wilderness system, it's like in addition to the national park system, and in conjunction with the states, and from St. Louis to Fort Clatsop, there's a host of areas that could be, some very small, a couple hundred acres, but the opportunity is there, and that is what needs to be done, and use those as a focal point to branch out the ripple effect, to resolve and ameliorate the damages and destruction, including removal of dams on the Snake, for example, and restoration of anadromous fisheries, natives, not genetically engineered species. And as the river goes, so goes everything else. And if you look at the motivation of such an expedition in a newly acquired chunk of country to the U.S., it makes good sense to try to figure out what you've got there. But obviously it was for reasons of politics and economic, gender, military understanding, military strength, because the result was all the way through they picked out selected areas that would lend themselves to forts. And you saw the leapfrogging progression over the 200 years or more thereafter of communities being established and railroads. And one of the massive geographic wide impacts, negative impacts, was essentially the destruction of our Native American societies. And we warehoused them on so-called reservations. And I grew up in South Dakota and among Native Americans. And if you reverse it, I wrote up a piece on this on the reverse and published it, where if Native Americans were the dominant instead of the whites were, and warehoused us on reservations, we would be extremely bitter and the loss of our culture and heritage. And that's what happened. So we wind up with a very negative issue, what I call the American Holocaust. That's not even as hard as it should be, but that's what's happened to our Native American peoples as a result of that expedition, in part. Because you always had the camp followers, you those fur traders and setting up, like Hudson Bay crowd came out of Canada and so on, the English came in here, the Scots. So the essence of it is you had a tremendous negative impact on Native American cultures. Millions of people, many of which died from introduced diseases and alcoholism, and no jobs, and so we still have not resolved that issue to date. That's a crime against our society, white society would never have. And that, to me, was largely triggered by the Lewis and Clark expedition.
Leaving Lewistown, Montana, heading for Grass Range, Winnett, and Jordan. Cold, windy, snow flurries, lots of weather coming in ahead. Feels like it's below freezing right now. We're up on the pass, the wind is blowing. But the wind is blowing at our backs, so we ought to get somewhere fast. Howdy. Oh, you have a leash law out here?
Yeah, there's supposed to be one.
All right. Down Highway 200, it's starting to clear up a little bit, but the wind is still howling, probably gusting up to 40-50 miles an hour, so we're really being pushed along at quite a rate. I hardly have to pedal at all, except I am pedaling to keep warm. And the landscape is beautifully stark, and forever it goes with very, very, very little sign of any kind of human activity. And so that is wonderful to roll through an area like that, mile after mile after mile. So tomorrow we'll have more of that heading to Jordan. But right now it is May 3rd on a windy, cold day in Winnett, Montana in the year 2000 on the adventure cycling bicycle trail. Now I'm going to walk out of the picture and then I'll come back into the picture. Watch this. It's tricky. How does he do this? How? He does it. Hey, look at that. Okay, it looks like we've got ourselves filmed from the bike as we ride. There we are, our true selves. Montana Historical Marker on the Lewis and Clark Trail, Highway 200, just east of the Musselshell River Valley. It's Sunday, May 5th, 2002, and we're just leaving Jordan, Montana on Highway 200 on the Lewis and Clark bicycle trail. Okay, we're at the rest area at the junction of Highway 24 and 200. I've been pedaling east from Jordan today. Only made 37 miles to this junction. It's now 4 o'clock. It's been a headwind and cold and rainy. And the forecast for later on this evening actually calls for some snow. So I'm not exactly sure at this time what I'm going to do. I'm kind of cold and tired. It's only about 20 miles to the first campsite from here, heading east, and heading east on the bike trail, but north at this junction on the refuge. So I think I'd rather try to get into the refuge and camp in a secluded place than out here in the open in this rest area. This rest area comes in real handy because they have water, which I'm hoping is drinkable. The road from Jordan to this junction at 24 is a really rough road. It's narrow, there's no shoulders, and it's steeply pitched up and down. It seems as if you're climbing all the time climbing for the past 37 miles, because the downhills are immediately over and then you're climbing again. Then you go downhill really quickly and you're climbing again. So this is going to be true for cyclists going east to west or west to east. This time, in my cycling from west to east, I had a terrific headwind all the way. The winds can change at any time. So, right now, pretty cold, windy, rainy, kind of bleak, and I think I'm going to take off and head north into the refuge and try to get the tent set up before it snows. Right now, it's raining. It's still raining. And I would say the horrible 4-year drought is definitely over. So it's a good thing I came out on this bike trip to help get that taken care of. So, don't. I don't go out in the blizzard like this with your bicycle, or get stuck in an area where there's nothing 50 miles on either side. Nothing. Not in weather like this. As I pedaled and hoped it would get better, the weather actually got worse. The size of the flakes increased, and at one point I stopped to do some walking to thaw out my legs, and I stepped off the side of the road into the famous gumbo, and the shoes got covered probably 2-3 inches deep with gumbo, which I may be able to get off later with a chisel. If I was able at this time, I would get up and show you the shoe. But for the moment, I think I'll just luxuriate on this really soft bed and warm room and pray for supper. That's the report from the Fort Peck Hotel on the Lewis and Clark Bicycle Trail.
You can kind of see it up there, but it's an amazing amount of construction work. Everything that you see out here, you have to remember, was built in the 1930s. And, all these people out here probably didn't have the best equipment, and they didn't have good living conditions, I can tell you that right now. And my mom's family came here from Minnesota in the 30s. There was like 9 kids, and they lived in a tar paper shack when they got here. So I was just raised listening to all these stories. So these people, they lived very sparingly, and they didn't have very much, but they were so grateful when they got here because they had a job. And the types of stories that she tells, and the type of community that they were, and the way that everybody worked and stuff together, it was happy. I mean, that was what was so neat about when they built this, that there were so many people that didn't have anything, but they worked really hard and they were happy just because they got to work. And people come here all the time because every year you get people coming back because of the memories and stuff when they built this place. And every little piece of it that you see is just a huge part of the history of the United States, because 10,000 people got to go to work here. And they didn't make very much. But fortunately, my family stayed, and I got to stay here too. So that's a pretty neat thing. On September 22nd, 1998, 6 years to the day that they had this slide, Fort Peck administrators from the lake, they put together a dedication up here. We had about 200 people here, and some of the survivors came for this dedication. Well, this is the slide right in here then. So if you go into these different communities all up and down the Missouri River and start to identify what's important to them as far as their relationship with the river, and you start to, once you identify that, and then you identify the cost, and it can be fair, it can be equal. You know, we don't have to fight over Montana should get more money than Nebraska. We just have to identify what our needs are and then work together. The thing that people lose sight of is that if all of a sudden you had Congress would be totally blown away if all of a sudden you had all of these states from the Missouri River Basin going to Washington, D.C. and saying, we want this much money, and if we had our little book ready and said, these are our needs, this is what we want to build this, it is our job to take care of that river, we're responsible for that river, and you know what, we're going to do it together, and we want you guys to give us the money. Because everybody from around the whole United States and Europe or wherever, at some point in their time are probably going to be on the river, looking at the river, using the river. There again, as the individuals in the community, we have to take care of it. And I think that it would just be, it's time that the way that we manage the river is done differently. And I think the people are willing to do that. The politicians just got to find something else to fight about and let us just start to do it. I think the people are ready to start taking care of it, you know. The whole Missouri River Basin Association has been a really great experience, you know, just looking at a bartender from Glasgow that gets to go to Kansas City and learn about these things, and it's totally changed the way that I think. And I think so much more, you know, I think river now, not lake, you know, it's different. I think all the people that have been involved in the process, you know, when we talk about Fort Peck Lake, that guy down in Nebraska, that farmer, he knows that I'm here, that I'm real. You know, I'm just not somebody that bitches all the time. It's true. I mean, that's the whole process is building trust and respect. You know, I mean, we can do such fantastic things if we can get to this next part. You know, and it's just time to do it.
On Highway 2, heading towards Wolf Point.
And so what happens is that the natural topography that we have here has been here for a long, long time, millions of years. And basically, it was the same as when Lewis and Clark came. It hasn't been ruined. There's very little, the only inhabitable people that came here was in the homestead days. And there was a person on every quarter section. Out here there was little general stores around, and they're all gone now. And so we have less people out here than we've ever had. except when the Native Americans were here. Well, anyway, what happens is that an old-timer told me, he said, now when you go out on that river, you be careful. Now my airboat's a flat-bottom boat, no prop in the water, right? So I loved it because I could scoot over the sandbars. You'd be cruising along in deep water, and then all of a sudden there's a sandbar.
Yeah.
Well, that might be have 2, 3, 4 inches of water cover in it. Sandbar. Regular boat, yeah, my airboat would slip right over it.
Nice.
And so I got to know the river really well. And what happened one day was this old timer told me, he says, now you got to be careful in cottonwood logs. They get waterlogged, and then they'll be right below the surface. Maybe a little bit of them sticking up, but they'll be 40, 50, 60 feet long. And he says, what happened? You're going to hit them.
And you'll tumble.
Yeah, you'll capsize him. That's why I got an airboat. And he said, well, you're all right there. But he said, be careful. He said, I've seen them. Whirlpools just pick them cottonwood logs up and stand them up and suck them right down. And they come out a quarter mile down the river. And I didn't believe it until one day I was sitting drifting in the river. And here come this cottonwood log, come around the bend, went on the outer, and all of a sudden this cottonwood log just stood up. And then it went down. And I said, wow. And so I drifted along and I waited for it to come up. And about a quarter of a mile down the river, it finally came up. And when it came right up just like a submarine coming out of the water. And I thought, geez, well, if I'd been coming up the river 30, 40 mile an hour and that old log coming out,
Incredible.
yeah. So I'm really careful.
Okay.
Because the river is always dynamic and changing, and it creates so much hardship. The old settlers found this out, and that's one of the reasons why they closed the river with big dams, is because of the flooding. There have been many, many home sites, ranches, that were built along the river, many, many feet away, quarter of a mile away from the river. Only in a matter of a few years, the ranch is swallowed up by the river. And so it's always been very difficult to survive economically in the river bottom.
And this is such an area,
Yeah,
right where we're at now.
that's correct. What we have here is the mouth of the Redwater where it flows into the Missouri River. Lewis and Clark came here and mapped this river, and then across the river is the Poplar River where it come in. And so this was an important site. Just to the east of here is where they ran into the juvenile grizzly. This river was really important for the Native Americans before the Europeans came. The Poplar, which is to the north and goes all the way into Canada, into southern Saskatchewan. What the Indians used this river, Redwater, because it would go all the way to the Yellowstone, Missouri divide between Circle and Glendive. The Indians would travel the Redwater because it was spring-fed, and the game were on the Redwater. They could go 100 miles, and then they could drop into the Yellowstone, into the Bighorn Basin. And so it was an interstate highway for the Indian peoples. And then when they got to the mouth at Wolf Point here in Poplar, they could cross at Wolf Point on the Missouri, come over to the Poplar River, and then go north all the way into Canada for another 100 miles. And so they could travel literally 200 miles without being out of water. And this is what happened when the Battle of Little Bighorn happened, was that Chief Sitting Bull led his tribe back up around on the Big Dry, which is spring-fed, and they circled back around and they harassed the fort at Fort Peck. And then that winter, when the cavalry and the infantry were chasing them, General Miles set up camp at Wolf Point Bridge. And when they built the Wolf Point Lewis and Clark Bridge, they pulled up his tent stakes. That was in 1929. And so we're talking a 50-year span there between Battle of Little Bighorn and when the bridge was built. And the tent stakes were still in the ground at the Wolf Point Bridge. Well, they had an overwinter camp there, General Miles did. And what happened here was Chief Gall, he camped here on the mouth of the Redwater. So they had, between here and Wolf Point, it's approximately 20 miles. And so Chief Gall wintered over here that winter, and General Miles wintered over at the Wolf Point Bridge. And so they kind of had a Mexican standoff. Neither one of them wanted to engage in battle in the winter. But Chief Gall, this is where he camped, in this general area. And he would send his warriors up on top of the hill to make sure that General Miles wasn't trying to pull an end around on him and sneak up on him and capture him. But they never did go into battle. They just sat there all winter. And then when spring, right before the ice went out, then Chief Gall, he packed up and he was already in Canada before Miles hardly even knew he was on the move. And that's why, was because they used these rivers as their interstate highways, and they can move very rapidly. And what they did is they would store their meat, their pemmican, in leather pouches. And then they would go along on a selected landmark and they would bury the pouch. And so they could virtually travel without any kind of baggage. All they had was their weapons. And so then they would just come into a selected area, dig up the pouch, and they had food, ready-to-eat meal, just like the MRIs or MREs that the military has. And they had them stored all over the prairie. And Army couldn't figure out why it was so difficult to catch them. Well, they already had their pemmican stored in the ground at a landmark, and they'd just ride up to it, dig it up, and take off. And they were already eating. They'd eat on the road while they're riding their horses. And the infantry or the cavalry had to stop and rest and cook a meal. The Indians were gone. They were already 20 miles ahead of them. And this is what Gall did. And so it was no great mystery to the Indian population of the poor white soldiers, the pony soldiers. They had to stop all the time. The Indians were already fed. They were rested. They were ready to go fight or move. And that's what they did. And so it was very easy for them. They were very adaptable to the plains life. They were very diversified in their food supply. And they knew where to go for the water. Where the cavalry and infantry, they were always out of water, and they're always out of feed, and they're always out of food, waiting for the supply train to come up. And it was no wonder and no amazement to historians now as to why the Indians were so difficult to control. It was because of this way of life that they had for generations practiced. And the white men were very slow to adopt and learn. And so it's pretty obvious why rivers were so important to the Native American, and as they are today to us in our European culture. They're extremely important. They're extremely important to take care of, because not only do they support us, but they support the habitat, the wildlife, the vegetation. Extremely important. Rivers are very important to us. Designated Lewis and Clark Bridge by its Governor Sam Ford at the 50th annual, back in the 40s, when the 150 year of Lewis and Clark. And Governor Ford came out and dedicated the bridge park also. This was such a big event when they built the bridge in the early 30s and late 20s that it was the best recreational site. People would come out here in droves and picnic and watch them build the bridge. And what happened here was that they've named the bridge park Lewis and Clark Bridge Park, and the bridge also Lewis and Clark Bridge. It spans two counties, BLM on the south, Roosevelt County on the north, Macomb County on the south, Fort Pitt Tribes on the north. And then we come to the bridge park, which is on both sides of the bridge. on the east side and the west side of the bridge, and that land was bought by the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks a couple of years ago, and from the city of Wolf Point. The bridge was built when there was no roads in eastern Montana. And the bridge building project here, when it was completed in 1931, signified the start of road building in eastern Montana. It was virtually a bridge that went to nowhere. There were no roads leading up to it. And consequently, it changed the whole social economic structure of this region. The agriculture and people used this bridge to cross, and so Wolf Point became a prime market area for the people. And so what happened was that the towns south of here, they died because people came to Wolf Point to shop and buy their farm implements, etc., etc. And so Circle, Ritchie, Vida died, and Wolf Point prospered. But as time went on, as our highways improved, then the bridge, the transportation infrastructure, then allowed people to go to Billings, Great Falls, Williston, Minot, North Dakota, Bismarck, other large shopping areas. And so the very thing that made Wolf Point also destroyed it. And then what happened was when the Montana became a state and then they became counties and they formed smaller counties, Wolf Point and Poplar got into a big fight over who was going to be the county seat. Well, when Wolf Point literally went down and stole the courthouse records, the county records from Poplar in the middle of the night with 6 guns, they did this. They strapped on their guns and they went down to Poplar and they loaded up the records and hauled them up to Wolf Point. And then Poplar, then everyone had to go to Wolf Point. So what happened then is that the city of Wolf Point, the Chamber of Commerce, then built what they call Nickwall Road on the south side, which we just traveled over. And we're here at the Nickwall Cemetery. Chamber of Commerce put up money to build a small county road parallel in the river for approximately 8 or 10 miles here. And then that brought in this small community into Wolf Point and took away the trade from Poplar. So that's what we have here. We have this small little bedroom community of Poplar now trading with Wolf Point. But as the times got tough in agriculture and the older people died off, the farms got larger and larger. And now there's only about 5 families out here. And so those people are all gone now. But they left a considerable history. One of the noted guys that lived out here was, his name was Dr. Atkinson, and he was a medical doctor in Poplar, and he served the needs of the reservation, Indians and the whites. And he had a large ranch out here, and so he was a mover and a shaker. And then all of his relatives came, and they settled around him, and that was the basis of this community. And there's only one descendant left out of all those people of probably 15 or 20 out of that family. There's only one left. And that's kind of the story of Montana. Those early homesteaders, pioneers, they're all gone and their descendants are gone. They've shipped their kids out of state. And so there's only about 5 families that actually live out here, which once probably there were several hundred. And there were small general stores in the area. And Nickwall School is the oldest school in Macomb County. It's no longer operable. It ceased operations in, I think it was 70 or 71. The first white child born on the reservation is buried in this cemetery. The first juvenile bear sighting that the Mandans told Lewis and Clark expedition about occurred in the Bainville, Culbertson area, approximately 50 miles to the east of here. But this was a large, very extremely large grizzly that attacked him. And basically the grizzly bears chased him all the way to Great Falls. That's the truth, too.
On Highway 2, heading east on the Lewis and Clark Bicycle Trail. I'm about maybe 15 miles east of Wolf Point, and we're heading toward Poplar. It is Friday, May 11, 2002. We're on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. This is the Yellowstone River flowing at this point into the Missouri at the confluence of the two rivers. Right here, the Missouri flows into North Dakota.
That this area right here, you know, where I'm sitting, is going to be changed within a year. There'll be earth movers coming in, and the grass will no longer be here, and some of these trees are going to probably end up getting cut down. You know, and a parking lot put in. Is that right? I mean, do we pave America? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't have the answers, though.
Well, tell people it's harder to catch this one. There's no skill to catch one of them.
It's a mama anyway. You gotta go to work, girl. Egg lady.
Off of the camera. I want to take a picture with that side. You go ahead and send it. The light is good.
Time to take a little bit of a break, because believe it or not, we made it to North Dakota. Just pulled in to North Dakota. Oh, yeah. Now, that was a long several hundred miles. On Highway 2, up on the High Line, just left Montana, and it's time for lunch or something. Whatever this is. Whatever it is, we're going to eat it. looks like I'm on the road. This is the road to Newtown. I think we're about 10 miles to Newtown. It's 8 p.m. and we've been on the road since 7. So I think we have done a good 70 miles today. Probably my best day. And it is Thursday, May 17th, 2002, on the Lewis and Clark Bicycle Trail.
I was raised pretty strong, not so much in a religious fashion, but more in a spirituality fashion of being able to pray. And the prayer is communicating, is talking to nature, talking to God, a creator, as I call him, and then being able to listen. And the listening is where you hear the direction and the guidance. And one of the strongest directions is to be able to follow what the water will tell you.